Good morning, y'all. My name is Britt Welch, and I welcome you to day one of the Minimizing Risk training series, where we hope to help providers meet licensing requirements related to risk, specifically regulations 160C, 520C, 520D, and beyond. This is a joint training from the Office of Licensing and the Office of Clinical Quality Management. I want to remind you this is a three-part training series. Each session builds off the previous day's session. It's our sincere hope that each of you here today will come back for days 2 and 3. Please note, each session has a separate registration link. The links were provided to you in a notice that went out from the Office of Licensing on March 22. Simply click on the date to register for that day's training. Again, we hope that each of you will attend each session. We think it's especially important if your organization was previously found non-compliant with any of the regulations that we're going to be covering over the next 3 sessions. Again, we greatly appreciate your being here. We know that you're very busy, and it means an awful lot to us that you're taking time to attend all 3 sessions. To ensure you get all future announcements from the Office of Licensing, including training and other notices, please subscribe to the free email list. The link to the Office of Licensing webpage is provided on this slide. At that link, you will click the subscribe to the email list button indicated under the blue arrow shown on this slide. You will hear from several presenters throughout this training. From the Office of Licensing, your presenters will be Mackenzie Glasgow, Associate Director of Quality and Compliance.
Good morning, everyone.
Michelle Laird, Manager of the Incident Management Unit. And Larissa Twirliger, Training Coordinator. From the Office of Clinical Quality Management, your presenters will be Mary Beth Cox, Quality Improvement Coordinator.
Good morning.
And me, Britt Welch, Director of Community Quality Management. Our 2 offices came together to develop this training, and we look forward to partnering for future trainings. I would be remiss if I did not talk to you a little bit about the different groups that were involved in presenting this training to you. There were a lot of moving parts, a lot of people involved, and a lot of time involved to produce the training. The groups that were instrumental in our training include the Region 5 Quality Council members, the members of the Risk Management Review Committee, providers, CSB, and licensing specialists who served as key informants on the regulations and testers of the tools you'll be shown, and colleagues from the Office of Community Quality Improvement, the Office of Clinical Quality Management, the Office of Integrated Health, and the Office of Licensing. Personally, I think this effort demonstrates how providers, CSBs, and offices within the department can partner to produce a quality product. Let's talk about a few housekeeping items before we get further along. Please put all your questions in the comments in the QA feature by clicking on the Q&A icon on your screen. Again, please use the QA feature for your questions and comments. The slides and documents will be posted on the licensing website. Additionally, there will be a frequently asked questions document produced after the training series. Y'all about ready to get going on this? All right, let's do it. The purpose of the 3-day training series is quite simply to provide you with information, tools, and resources that can assist you in achieving compliance with these regulations. Specifically, that's 160C, 520C, and 520D, along with the related skills and tasks that will need to be completed. Now, as y'all are aware, these 3 requirements focus on tracking serious incidents and conducting a systemic risk assessment review. And spoiler alert, I think y'all are going to like this, folks. Again, there are 3 sessions in this training series. Each session builds off the previous day's training, and I encourage you to attend each session. You will be introduced to new tools that have been tested by CSBs and private providers. And we think you'll find these useful and practical for helping you meet these regulations. We also hope to clarify previously confusing aspects of the regs and provide helpful tips and suggestions throughout the 3 sessions. There will be homework after this session and the second session. And I know you thought you were done with homework a few years ago, or in my case, many years ago. But let's be real clear about what we're after here. We want you to be successful. We want you to gain familiarity and a comfort level with the tools. You will not be graded on your homework, but we do need to know what your experience was like in using the tools. To accomplish that, we're using a model of training that's used in a lot of training programs. It's a model of classroom, application in the field of what you've learned, back to the classroom to discuss how things went, and then back to applying what is learned. Today's session will focus on systemic risk assessment. Session 2 will focus on understanding and tracking serious incidents and care concerns. In session 3, we're going to pull it all together. There will be a post-test after each session. Please take time to complete the post-test. It gives us feedback on areas where we need to make improvements. We're allowing time during the session to complete the post-test, and we truly appreciate y'all helping us out. Y'all with us? All right, let's take a look at our learning objectives for the day. Today, we're focusing on systemic risk assessment. Our learning objectives for the rest of today's session are for you to understand why we're focusing on these particular regulations. Understand the difference between quality improvement plans and risk management plans. Again, that's the difference between quality improvement plans and risk management plans. We want you to know about the Office of Licensing's resources for 520C and D and where to find them. We want you to understand your responsibilities as providers for 520C and D. We want you to understand a systemic risk, what a systemic risk assessment is and why it is important. We want you to be able to conduct an annual systemic risk assessment with all components of 520C plus 520D. And we want you to be confident that you can achieve compliance with 520C and D. So why is risk management important to an organization? A risk means there's a chance of an adverse event or outcome happening. In other words, there's a possibility that something harmful could happen. In risk management, it consists of processes and practices that help us to identify, understand, and reduce risk. In other words, we want to decrease the chance of something harmful happening. Now, in our field, there are 2 global areas of risk, clinical and administrative. For clinical risk, think about service delivery and possible harmful events such as infections, trips and falls, skin breaks, aspiration, medication errors, and the list goes on. On the administrative side, think about those aspects that support service provision, things like staffing, staff turnover, background checks, billing, financial sustainability, etc. Ultimately, risk management is about identifying, understanding, and reducing risk to improve outcomes for individuals and to improve the effectiveness of services and your organization. So why are we focusing on these specific regulations? The Risk Management Review Committee, otherwise known as the RMRC, and the Regional Quality Council in Region 5, otherwise known as RQC5, are subcommittees of the department's quality management system. Both of these subcommittees are required to propose a quality improvement initiative each year. For fiscal year 23, the current fiscal year that is, these subcommittees both noticed low performance on these regulations that we're going over. They decided to partner and propose a quality improvement initiative to try to improve performance across the system on these regulations. A piece of data that they looked at was the performance measure indicator, otherwise known as the PMI for regulation 520. Now this PMI, looks at the percent of licensed DD providers that have met 100%, that is all of the risk management requirements, excluding not applicable, not determined. The result for fiscal year 21 was 62%. For fiscal year 22, the result was 61%. Now, the target for this measure is 86%. So you could say we're coming in a little bit short here. Let's take a look on the next slide at the results of each specific sub-regulation for 520. On this slide, the red box at the top of the slide shows the result of 61% for fiscal year 22, and just like we discussed. The information on the bottom of the slide shows the results for each sub-regulation of 520. In the red box, it highlights the components 520 C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, and 520D. The red font means 75% or less of DD providers met this regulation. The gold font means between 76 and 85% of DD providers met the regulation. And the green font means 85% or higher of providers met this regulation. You can see that even during fiscal year 22, although we achieved green in many areas, no regulation surpassed 86% consistently, and none reached 86% for the year. In addition, 520C3, 520C4, and 520D were the lowest at 79% to 80%. These results stood out to RQC5 and the RMC committee, and they believe that if we can improve 520C and D, it will improve the overall measure for 520. Let's take a look at the data from another perspective here. You'll notice in this graph that we're very close to hitting target. We see the results for each quarter in fiscal year 22 for each sub-regulation, 520C1, 520C2, 520C3, and so on. Now let's break that down a little bit. You see the red target line of 86% going from left to right across the top of the graph? Okay, you'll also see that many regulations made it to 86% or almost made it at some point during the year. However, take a look at 520D. It never reached 86%. We're providing this training to help you achieve success with these measures, and we're hoping you will join us in trying to meet the goal of 86% or even above for this measure. Folks, we are all in this together, and your success is everybody's success. Now, before I hand off the presentation to my teammate, Mackenzie Glasgow, I want y'all to hear the words I'm about to say to you. These metrics, they are achievable, and you can do it. You can do this. Mackenzie?
Thank you, Britt, and good morning, everyone. Right now, we're going to take a few minutes to review the foundation. This includes the mission and vision of the Office of Licensing, navigating the OL website for resources and tools, as well as a brief discussion related to the regulations. As you know, a good foundation is the key to success. Next slide. The Office of Licensing's mission is to be the regulatory authority for DBHDS licensed service delivery systems through effective oversight. The vision of the Office of Licensing is to provide consistent, responsive, and reliable regulatory oversight to DBHDS licensed providers by supporting high-quality services to meet the diverse needs of its clients. On your screen is the link to the Office of Licensing's website. From here, you can access the regulations, guidance documents, tools, resources, and training documents, which are available to assist providers in achieving compliance with the regulatory requirements. Next slide. Navigating the OL website. The Office of Licensing sends notifications to providers who have signed up for Constant Contact. When memos are sent, they are typically posted to the Office of Licensing's website under the Correspondence section. Items listed under this section include pertinent information that licensed providers may find helpful. As Britt mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, you can subscribe to the email list from the Office of Licensing's website. It is also highly recommended that you frequent the Office of Licensing's website so you can stay informed. Please make sure that you're signed up to receive notifications. We cannot stress this enough. A guidance document is any document developed by a state agency that provides information or guidance of a general nature to agency staff or the public to interpret or implement statutes or the agency's regulations. We have several guidance documents located on the Office of Licensing's website. The Office of Licensing develops guidance documents when it is determined that more detailed explanations are needed related to interpreting regulations. All current DBHDS guidance documents can be found here by clicking on the link. As you can see, there are 33 guidance documents relevant to DBHDS. Thank you. Next slide. This is an example of what you would see when you click on the guidance for risk management. To view the document text, you would then click the View Document Text link. Next. Once the link opens, you are able to view the guidance document. A provider who follows guidance documents and incorporates them into their policies and procedures is more likely to be compliant with the DBHDS rules and regulations. The Office of Licensing's website includes training and technical assistance documents related to root cause analysis, risk management, care concerns, and quality improvement, in addition to other resources. The Minimizing Risk training will provide additional information related to risk management. As you can see, the most recent trainings are posted and technical assistance documents are also located on the website. The Office of Licensing also posts trainings and technical assistance documents related to care concerns. The Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services defines risk triggers and thresholds as care concerns through review of serious incident reporting conducted by the Incident Management Unit. As seen here, there are also trainings and technical assistance documents related to quality improvement. Additionally, you can locate resources related to serious incident reporting and CRIS training. Please familiarize yourself with our website. We cannot stress this enough. Now, Larissa Terwilliger, the Office of Licensing Training Coordinator, is going to talk briefly about the rules and regulations for licensed providers.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Good morning, everyone. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the regulations. The DBHDS regulations can be located on the Office of Licensing website. The Managing Risk training is specific to licensed providers that are required to comply with Chapter 105 Rules and Regulations for Licensing Providers by the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. However, the tools and resources provided during these training sessions can be adapted and used for providers licensed to provide services under Chapter 46, Children's Residential Facilities. Providers should always read the regulations closely and have an understanding of what they mean. Providers should ensure that their policies and procedures align with the regulations. If you have a question about a regulation, please reach out to your assigned licensing specialist. Providers should avoid copying and pasting regulations directly into their policies and procedures. Policies and procedures should be tailored to your organization. If a consultant writes your policies and procedures, your agency will still be required to understand and to implement these regulations and be able to answer questions posed by your licensing specialist. This training series will provide detailed information related to Regulation 160C, which states that the provider shall collect, maintain, and review at least quarterly all serious incidents including level 1 serious incidents, as part of the quality improvement program in accordance with Regulation 620 to include an analysis of trends, potential systemic issues or causes, indicated remediation, and documentation of steps taken to mitigate the potential for future incidents. Additionally, we'll be reviewing Regulation 520C1 through 5, which states that the provider shall conduct systemic risk assessment reviews at least annually to identify and respond to practices, situations, and policies that could result in the risk of harm to individuals receiving services. The risk assessment review shall address at least the following: the environment of care, clinical assessment or reassessment processes, staff competence and adequacy of staffing, use of high-risk procedures, including seclusion and restraint, a review of serious incidents, and lastly, the systemic risk assessment process shall incorporate uniform risk triggers and thresholds as defined by the department. So, what are your responsibilities as a provider? Providers should be able to locate the most current DBHDS regulations and guidance documents. Providers should be able to understand and interpret the regulations. Providers should have written policies and procedures that align with the regulations. Providers should have updated applicable policies, procedures, and forms when the regulations change. Providers should have systems in place to minimize risk. Providers should be able to submit a corrective action plan to DBHDS for approval when determined to be non-compliant with a regulation or regulations. Before we dive into the systemic risk assessment and care concerns, it is important to understand risk management and the responsibilities of the person responsible for the risk management function. Let's face it, risk management is a regulatory requirement. As you probably know, providers are assessed for their compliance with risk management regulations during inspections and may also be assessed in this area during an investigation. And as it relates to the DOJ, an overall compliance goal for regulations 160 and 520 is 86% across all licensed providers. We're not there quite yet, but we are making moves in the right direction. So let's get started. It's important to know that the DBHDS regulations include definitions. One very important definition is that of risk management, which is an integrated system-wide program to ensure the safety of individuals, employees, visitors, and others through identification, mitigation, early detection, monitoring, evaluation, and control of risks. Regulation 520A states that the provider shall designate a person responsible for the risk management function who has completed department-approved training. That training shall include training related to risk management, understanding of individual risk screening, conducting investigations, root cause analysis, and the use of data to identify risk patterns and trends. Do keep in mind that the number of risk managers depends on the size of the organization. The person responsible for the risk management function may have other duties, but if they are the designated risk manager, then their job description must also include risk management responsibilities. The risk manager must complete the DBHDS approved trainings that are listed on the current crosswalk of approved risk management training. The provider must keep a copy of the risk manager's attestation form on site. It does not need to be submitted directly to the Office of Licensing unless it's requested. Annual retraining is not required. Therefore, the attestation form does not need to be completed annually. However, a new attestation form must be completed when there is a change in the designated risk manager, as the new risk manager would be required to complete the approved risk management training. As previously stated, the regulatory requirement states that the provider must have a person designated by the provider to be responsible for the risk management function. Please note that this person may oversee other persons who carry out risk management activities, but it's the designated person who is ultimately responsible for this function. Only the designated person is required by the regulation to complete the required training. In August of 2022, the crosswalk of DBHDS approved trainings was updated so that it was easier for the provider and the risk manager to determine which trainings were required. As you can see here, the first column in this crosswalk outlines the 5 training topic areas, which, as shown, are risk management, understanding of individual risk screening, conducting investigations, root cause analysis, and use of data to identify risk patterns and trends. The second column shown here provides the DBHDS approved trainings for each of the topic areas, and the associated hyperlinks allow easy access to each training. The risk manager only has to complete 1 training per topic area, but may choose to complete the others if they choose. Upon completion of a DBHDS approved training for each topic area, the designated risk manager should complete the corresponding risk management attestation form. Now let's take a look at the attestation form. Beginning January 1st, 2023, whenever a new risk manager is hired, providers are required to use the attestation form located on the DBHDS website. For all topic areas listed in the chart, the risk manager must select the name of the completed DBHDS approved training and document the date of completion. Again, additional information related to the DBH approved trainings and the requirements of Regulation 520A can be found within the crosswalk of DBHDS approved risk management training, which we reviewed on the previous slide. To be determined as compliant, the provider should select at least 1 approved training in each of these 5 topic areas, complete the training, check the box, and enter the training completion date. It's really that simple. Remember, the attestation form does not need to be submitted directly to the Office of Licensing upon completion. However, the form must be kept on file and presented upon request to the Office of Licensing. Lastly, the person responsible for risk management shall attest to the completion of required training for each topic area by signing and dating this DBHDS risk management attestation form. The attestation shall also be signed and dated by the person's direct supervisor if applicable. On the updated attestation form, if the designated risk manager does not have an immediate supervisor, this can be indicated on the form by checking that box. For example, for a very small organization, the risk manager may also be the owner. Don't forget that you can access the current form from the DBHDS website. Mary, if you'll click the Office of Licensing link shown here. Thank you. We'll scroll on down to the crosswalk and attestation.
Did I click on the right thing?
Did. I believe my screen is kind of small to see. Let's see.
The risk management.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you, Mary. That's what you'll expect to see. Remember that the job description for the person responsible for the risk management function must include language pertaining to risk management. Such language could include will perform the role of a risk manager, responsible for oversight of the agency's risk management plan, is responsible for completing a systemic risk assessment at least annually, or any other appropriate duties. As you see here, this job description includes risk management language and the duties of someone responsible for the risk management function. Remember, the person responsible
I think Larissa's mic cut out, which she told us might happen. So I think we just have to wait a second to see if she comes back.
I think I'm back, Mary Beth. Are you with me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I apologize for that.
Okay.
So to pick up where I left off, just as a reminder, the person responsible for the risk management function may have other duties, but if they are the designated risk manager, then their job description must also include risk management responsibilities. Now let's take a few minutes to talk about the risk management plan. Regulation 520B states that the provider shall implement a written plan to identify, monitor, reduce, and minimize harms and risks of harm, including personal injury, infectious disease, property damage or loss, and other sources of potential liability. Risk management plans are based on assessed risks, potential risks, and include strategies and efforts needed to mitigate those risks. Each provider's risks will vary depending on size, population served, services offered, and unique risks associated with their business model. A risk management plan can apply to just one of the provider services or to the entire organization. A provider's risk management plan may be a standalone risk management plan, or it may be integrated into the provider's overall quality improvement plan. Systemic risk assessment is a component of the provider's risk management plan. It's a tool for proactively identifying systemic risks and should inform the risk management plan. The systemic risk assessment must be reviewed and updated at least annually, or any time that the provider identifies a need to review and update the plan based on ongoing quality review and risk management activities, such as during its quarterly reviews of all serious incidents. Now let's look at the differences between a risk management plan and a quality improvement plan. Providers must have a written risk management plan focused on identifying, monitoring, reducing, and minimizing harm and risk of harm through a continuous comprehensive approach. This plan should identify year-over-year trends and patterns and use baseline data to assess the effectiveness of risk management systems. Regarding the quality improvement plan, the provider must have a written work plan developed that defines steps the provider will take to review the quality of services it provides and to manage initiatives to improve quality. A quality improvement plan consists of systemic and continuous actions that lead to measurable improvement in the services, supports, and health status of the individuals receiving services. There is no specific template required for creating a quality improvement plan. However, staff responsible for implementation of the quality improvement plan must review and update the plan at least annually. The bottom line really is that a provider must have a risk management plan and a quality improvement plan. The provider's risk management plan may be a standalone risk management plan, or it may be integrated into the provider's overall quality improvement plan. Risk management plans should reflect the size of the organization, the population served, and any unique risks associated with the provider's business model. Risk management plans should include, as shown here, how the provider would identify risks, how the provider would monitor risks, and how the provider would reduce and minimize risks. The risk management plan should also identify risks associated with personal injury, infectious diseases, property damage or loss, and other sources of potential liability. Risk can be identified in several ways, such as using the systemic risk assessment or safety inspections, serious incident reporting, infectious disease reporting, financial reports, documented medication errors, instances of property damage or loss, emergency preparedness responses, and personal injuries sustained on providers' premises. A provider can monitor risks through their review of serious incidents, the committee or leadership review of trends, care concerns, and several other ways. A provider can reduce and minimize risk by conducting a root cause analysis, proposing an initiative to minimize risk related to findings from their systemic risk assessment, and even implementing new training. For risk management plans that are integrated with an overall quality improvement plan, the provider is expected to identify the sections that address the risk management requirements. The combined plan would need to be dated, since the quality improvement plan is required to be updated at least annually. An annual risk assessment review is a necessary component of a provider's risk management plan. A risk assessment is a careful examination of what the provider identifies as internal and external factors or situations that could cause harm to individuals served or that could negatively impact the organization. A risk assessment should lead to a better understanding of actual or potential risks and how best to minimize those risks. A risk assessment varies depending on numerous factors, such as the organization's size, population served, location, or business model. This review should include consideration of harms and risks identified and lessons learned from the provider's quarterly reviews of all serious incidents conducted pursuant to Regulation 160C, including an analysis of trends, potential systemic issues or causes, indicated remediation, and documentation of steps taken to mitigate the potential for future incidents. Now you're going to hear from my colleague Mary Beth Cox in the Office of Clinical Quality Management. She's going to discuss our first new tool, the flowchart for incident reviews.
All right. Thank you, Larissa, and good morning again to everybody. So our partners from the Office of Licensing just reviewed important regulations and tools and resources. One question that we have heard time and time again is, how do all those pieces fit together? In response to that, the Office of Clinical Quality Management and the Office of Licensing partnered last year to create this flowchart that we're going to review. It can be found on the Office of Licensing website at the link given on the slide. And the description when you go to the website is Flowchart Incident Reviews April 2023, because we just updated it. It is an at-a-glance flowchart for incident reviews. So this is specific to the serious incident review process. Let's walk through it step by step. I'm going to turn on my Zoom. Here we go. So first, I want you to notice that there is a symbol bank at the bottom that tells you what each symbol means. The oval means start and end. The curved rectangle is a process step. Diamonds are decision points. Straight line boxes are labels. Curvy boxes are documents. Arrow indicates the flow of activities, the solid arrow, and the dotted line indicates the flow of data. Next, notice that the arrows, of course, throughout the process map lead you to the next step, and that licensing measures are referenced throughout. And here you can see they have red boxes around them where the licensing regulations are referenced. We're going to use this like a map during the training and make stops along the way to help us with 520C and D and 160C and more. An important thing to understand about 520C and D is it is an annual review, but should include and build on what your organization has been tracking and reviewing quarterly and throughout the year. That is why 520C and D are related to 160C and other regulations as well, as depicted in the flowchart. So we're going to walk through the map. Let's start at the individual event level. First, the provider becomes aware of the serious incident. The provider needs to record information, which is data, about the incident. The provider needs to record information such as the type of incident, the reason, the demographics of the individual. If it is a level 1 incident, the provider needs to document this for internal tracking per regulation 160C. If it is a level 2 or 3 incident, it needs to be reported within the CRIS system within 24 hours per regulation 160D2. Note that the dotted circle around these items, and this indicates that this is data collection that you're going to use later in your quarterly review. If this is a level 2 or 3 incident, regulations require that the provider conduct a root cause analysis, or RCA, within 30 days per regulation 160E. There's some helpful questions in this diagram as well to help you discuss the incident as you are doing your root cause analysis. In addition, the provider should determine if more detailed root cause analysis is needed per regulation 160E. Providers need to take action to address the root causes that are identified. This is per regulation 160E. Now let's look at the quarterly review. So that is the next lane in our, this is a swim lane diagram. So we're going to look at the quarterly review. It begins with compiling the data on serious incidents and care concerns that you've been collecting from individual events. You follow the dotted lines from the information about the incident and documenting information about the level 1 and 2 and 3 incidents. Note to include the individual care concern LSA notification report from CRIS. At a minimum, you need to list each type of incident and count how many of each one happened. This includes level 1 incidents. This is per regulation 160C. You need to ask questions like, what incidents occurred most often? Is there a pattern? In the next box, you also need to review care concerns and then take actions to address the root causes. Note the solid gray arrow that indicates this is a quarterly process. So make sure to set a schedule and assure that this is done quarterly. So let's go down to our last row, which is the annual systemic risk assessment review. The requirements for this are described in regulations 520C and D. So begin by compiling the quarterly data of serious incidents and care concerns from the year. And then next, review the trends of serious incidents and care concerns, asking questions like, what types of incidents happened most often? What could have resulted in the most harm? Were there common root causes? What patterns did you see? Next, the diamond shape indicates that you need to decide if you need to take any action or address the identified risks, such as updating policies and procedures or incorporating information into your risk management plan or your quality improvement plan, and take those actions. Whoops, sorry, it escaped too much. Let me get back to our slide. There we go. This cycle of reviewing incidents needs to continue, of course, on an ongoing basis. For the rest of today, we're going to focus on the annual systemic risk assessment. It is, as indicated here, the gold star, the star of our show today. Next week, we're going to walk through from the beginning of this map to how to document and track and review serious incidents. And we have a really cool tool that we cannot wait to show you. Before I turn it back over to Mackenzie to review the systemic risk assessment, let's do a few poll questions. So get your mouse finger going here. So this is going to launch a few poll questions, and it should show on your screen. And we'll give you all a few minutes to respond. So there are 2 questions, so make sure that you do both questions. I'm gonna be here for a second. All right, I see those responses coming in. Great job. Y'all know that there are 800 people in attendance at this webinar, which is awesome. So I'm hoping to see 800 responses to our poll question. Okay, they are coming in. Thanks, guys. Okay, we have about half of people who have responded. That's awesome. We have some engaged participants today. I wish everybody could see what I see. It's like a horse race. Like all the bars are moving. I'm gonna see which one's gonna win. Okay, we have more than 500 responding. Okay, might be slowing down. All right, it looks like it's slowed down right now, kind of hovering around 580 responded. All right, so I'm going to take a screenshot of this just in case I'm not able to share it. And let's see. For the sake of time, I think I'm going to end the poll. We can see the responses. Okay. So can folks see the responses? It said I was able to share them. Can you see?
Yes.
You can see them. Oh, great. Oh, that's so exciting. I remember a time when we couldn't do that. All right, so we can see people's responses and so the first question was, which of the following is not a required component of a systemic risk assessment? And the correct answer, you could give yourself a pat on the back, is medication administration. Of course, that's an important area of risk, but it is not a required component of the systemic risk assessment. So good job if you chose that one. And then number 2, how often do you have to complete a systemic risk assessment? And give yourself a pat on the back if you said annual. Good job. Almost a large percentage got that one correct. And as we just reviewed, of course, you can do it more often. So you could do it quarterly, you could do it monthly, but you have to do it annually. So please correct me if I got any of that wrong, Mackenzie or Larissa. So, all right. So thanks to everybody for participating in our poll. So let me get back to our slides and I will turn it over to, I think it's Mackenzie, to get us on the deep dive here.
All right. Thank you, Mary Beth.
Yeah.
I know that you want to know more about the regulations related to the systemic risk assessment. So let's go ahead and take a closer look. As previously mentioned, the systemic risk assessment review is required to be conducted at least annually. This review shall address at least the following areas: the environment of care, clinical assessment or reassessment processes, staff competence and adequacy of staffing, use of high-risk procedures, including seclusion and restraint, and include a review of serious incidents. Keep in mind that identifying risks and potential risks helps to prevent harm to the individuals served, to staff, and to your organization. There are many risks that may affect an organization, and a provider's risks could change from year to year. Don't forget, even if a provider has not served any individuals, the provider is still able to identify potential risks. Now we will break down each section, starting with the environment of care. The environment of care means the physical environment where services are provided, such as the building and physical premises. A review of the environment of care should consider the results of the annual safety inspection conducted per Regulation 520E when applicable, but is broader than a safety inspection. Examples: any site where individuals are served, how the area where services are provided is arranged, any special protective features that may be present, location, amount, and condition of safety equipment, including fire extinguishers, first aid kits, flashlights, and much more. Remember, the objective is to provide a safe, functional, and effective environment for individuals served, staff members, and others. Results of safety inspections should be incorporated into the systemic risk assessment. Every organization will have different risks associated with its environment of care. Each provider needs to think about its environment of care and the potential risks. An examination of what internal and external factors or situations could cause harm to the individual served or that could negatively impact the organization. Clinical assessment and reassessment processes. Examples of assessments include physical exams that are completed prior to admission or anytime there is a change in the individual's physical or mental status. Reassessments include reviews of incidents in which the individual was involved and reviews of the individual's health risks. Persons designated as responsible for the risk management function need not be engaged in the clinical assessment or reassessment process, but should review these processes during the risk assessment review. For example, are assessment processes effectively identifying and mitigating risks unique to each individual? Other examples to think about: admission assessments include risk of harm to self or others. Physical exams for individuals, are they completed annually? Assessments and reassessments include fall risk assessments. Reassessments include a review of incidents in which the individual was involved. Staff competence and adequacy of staffing. Remember, risks vary according to the licensed provider. Examples of factors related to staff competency and adequacy of staffing include whether all employees meet minimum qualifications to perform their duties, all employees complete orientation, training prior to being assigned to perform direct care work, all employees have undergone background checks, all employees have completed abuse and neglect training, all employees have up-to-date CPR certification, those employees who administer medications have received required training, Employees have completed additional training applicable to their job functions, such as initial and annual fire safety training. Staffing schedules are consistent with the provider's staffing plan, and the staffing plan continues to be adequate to meet the needs of the individuals being served. Reviews of serious incidents over the prior year may help to inform this consideration. It has been noted that adequacy of staffing is not consistently included in the Systemic Risk Assessment Review. As a reminder, 520C3 must address staff competency and adequacy of staffing. Use of high-risk procedures, including seclusion and restraint. High-risk procedures may involve questions such as, is the use of seclusion and restraint in compliance with human rights regulations? Are high-risk procedures reviewed regularly? Are the staff trained to implement high-risk procedures? Are high-risk procedures properly authorized and reviewed per policy, regulation, and law? Other examples may include, all staff are trained on how to safely transfer individuals. All staff will refrain from the use of seclusion and restraints. All staff are trained on how to use CPI techniques. A review of serious incidents. The provider systemic risk review shall evaluate serious incidents at least annually. Examples of considerations related to serious incidents include whether all serious incidents, including level 1, level 2, and level 3, are reviewed at least quarterly. What trends are identified? What kinds of incidents are reported? Are they related in terms of the type of incident? Were there similar incidents that appeared close together in time? Was there anything unique that took place at that time? Are there any patterns relevant to the specific time of day, day of week, location, program, certain types of activities, or even the presence of other people or visitors? Reflect on what has been learned from root cause analyses. Additional examples may include, all serious incidents are reported to the authorized representative within 24 hours of discovery. Medication errors are reviewed quarterly. Staff injuries will be reviewed quarterly. Does the provider have an updated policy that defines who has the authority and responsibility to act when a serious incident or a pattern of serious incidents indicates that an individual is at risk? The provider must also have evidence that they completed an analysis of trends from their quarterly review of serious incident, identified potential systemic issues or causes, indicated remediation, and planned or implemented steps taken to mitigate the potential for future incidents. This includes identifying year-over-year trends and patterns and the use of baseline data to assess the effectiveness of risk management systems. It's important to note that this is an area of focus for the independent reviewer and his consultants as it relates to the DOJ settlement agreement. Lucky for you, Mary Beth will be introducing a risk tracking tool during the next training session. Regulation 520D states that the systemic risk assessment process shall incorporate uniform risk triggers and thresholds as defined by the department. DBHDS defines risk triggers and thresholds as care concerns through review of serious incident reporting conducted by the Incident Management Unit. The provider's systemic risk assessment must incorporate care concerns. The list of current care concerns was recently updated in January of 2023. Providers should be monitoring the current list of care concerns. The Incident Management Unit identifies care concerns which are available for providers to review in CRIS. Providers should be able to show the Office of Licensing how they monitored care concerns and how they used the data. If there are no care concerns identified, a provider must document how they would review and address care concerns if they arise. Care concerns will be addressed in more detail by Michelle Leard during the next session. Effective January 2023, the current care concern thresholds are as follows. Multiple, 2 or more unplanned medical hospital admissions or ER visits for falls, urinary tract infection, aspiration pneumonia, dehydration, or seizures within a 90-day time frame for any reason. Any incident of a decubitus ulcer diagnosed by a medical professional, an increase in the severity level of a previously diagnosed decubitus ulcer, or a diagnosis of a bowel obstruction diagnosed by a medical professional. Any choking incident that requires physical aid by another person, such as abdominal thrusts, back blows, clearing of airway, or CPR. Multiple, 2 or more unplanned psychiatric admissions within a 90-day time frame for any reason.
Great, thanks, Mackenzie. I'm going to interrupt here because we're getting a lot of great questions in the Q&A feature. And I think Tanya Carr is going to unmute and tell us briefly how the questions are going to be handled.
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. We just wanted to let you know that we are taking notes of all of the questions that the questions that you guys are posting in our question and answer pod, and we will be sending out formal responses to the questions that you posted. So just know that some questions may take longer to respond to, so you may not see a direct answer to them in the chat, the question and answer chat today. So we just want you to know that we are taking all of the questions, and a formal FAQ document will follow as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tanya. Sorry to interrupt, Mackenzie.
Oh, not a problem at all. Thank you, Tanya.
All right, next slide.
Thank you. All right, risk triggers and thresholds, those care concerns. The systemic risk assessment shall include a review of risk triggers and thresholds that were met and whether they were addressed. Example, on an annual basis, a provider would ask the following. Did we review the care concerns and determine whether there was a need for further action? If further action was needed, did it occur? If not, what were the barriers? If actions were implemented, did this mitigate future risks? Let's not forget about those safety inspections. Regulation 520E states that the provider shall conduct and document that a safety inspection has been performed at least annually of each service location, owned, rented, or leased by the provider. Recommendations for safety improvement shall be documented and implemented by the provider. An annual safety inspection must be completed at least annually for all service locations. Safety inspections are not the same as the environment of care. A review of the environment of care should consider the results of the annual safety inspections when applicable, but is broader than a safety inspection. Environment of care should include an analysis of risks associated with provision of services, whether the risk is present in a residential setting, community-based setting, an individual's home, outpatient office, or in the community. Providers may not have direct control over identified risks, but an analysis will help the provider develop a plan to mitigate those risks. Remember, environment of care does not focus exclusively on homes. Let's talk a little more about the safety inspection and the environment of care. So, what is the difference? The safety inspection focuses exclusively on the physical environment. It is performed annually at each service location and makes recommendations for safety improvement. The results of the annual safety inspection should be included in the systemic risk assessment. Remember, regulations 520E and 520C1 are not the same. So what is a systemic risk assessment? Remember, a risk assessment is a careful examination of what the provider identifies as internal and external factors or situations that could cause harm to individuals served or that could negatively impact the organization. The risk assessments should lead to a better understanding of actual or potential risks and how to best minimize those risks. Systemic risk assessments vary depending on numerous factors, such as an organization's size, population served, location, or business model. The risk assessment process is focused on identifying both existing and potential harms and risks of harm. Where do I begin? First, determine a format and then determine who will conduct the risk assessment. Is it leadership, the risk manager, or a committee? Now we're going to take a look at the systemic risk assessment template developed by the Office of Licensing. We will also provide you with some tips and reminders to assist you as you complete the annual systemic risk assessment. Providers may choose to use the new DBHDS Systemic Risk Assessment template. Please note that this is not a required template for a provider's annual risk assessment. However, utilization of this template will assist providers in achieving compliance with the regulatory requirements outlined in Regulation 520C. The reason providers can use their own format is because every provider's risks will vary. Before we talk about the format of the systemic risk assessment template, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the risk matrix that's included on the last page of the template. So, what is a risk matrix? If you aren't familiar with this term, a risk matrix can be used during a risk assessment to determine the level of risk by considering the category of probability against the category of severity. This is simply a mechanism to increase visibility of risks and assist management with decision-making. When creating a risk assessment, the provider could look at the likelihood of something happening and how serious is the risk. For example, a serious risk that is likely to occur could result in a score of 3, which is unacceptable high risk, according to this matrix, and the risk may need to be addressed immediately. All right, so let's take a look at the first page of the systemic risk assessment template. Again, you're not required to use this template. However, utilization of this template will assist you in achieving compliance with the regulatory requirements. When completing the template, you will need to fill in the provider name, the provider's policy number, if applicable, and the effective date. The effective date is the date in which the provider determines that they will begin to use this form. A revision date will be entered if the provider decides to modify the format of the form. At the bottom of the slide, you can see that the template includes columns for the provider to enter the identified risk areas, any findings, a risk score, if applicable, recommendations, comments or actions, a column to indicate if the risk management plan will be updated, and a section for the date. Remember, this review will address, at a minimum, risk areas related to the environment of care, clinical assessment or reassessment processes, staff competence and adequacy of staffing, use of high-risk procedures, including seclusion and restraint, and include a review of serious incidents. Oh, and don't forget to incorporate those care concerns. Those are a required component of the systemic risk assessment. Now, I invite you to follow along with me as we look at the risk areas. Remember, these are just examples. The systemic risk assessment will vary depending on the numerous factors such as the organization's size, services provided, population served, location, or business model. 520C1, Environment of Care. This provider identified 3 areas as it relates to the environment of care. The first area has to do with the floors being clean and free of trip hazards. According to the provider, they identified a cracked bathroom tile floor, which resulted in a risk score of 2. Their recommendation was to replace the cracked tile, and the work was completed April 14th. The provider determined that this would not need to be incorporated into their risk management plan. The second area pertains to recycling, composting, and garbage so that it does not create a nuisance or invite insects or rodents. Based on their findings, there were no identified issues and they indicated a risk score of 1. They also noted no recommendations at this time and determined it would not be necessary to add this to the risk management plan. The last area has to do with the ventilation, in which the provider indicated that the age of the home presents a risk resulting in a risk score of 3. Additionally, the provider indicated that they would contract with a company to evaluate this further and assign this task to the risk manager. The provider also indicated that they would add this to their risk management plan. These are just a few examples of risk areas related to the environment of care. Now let's move on to clinical assessment and reassessment processes. 520C2, Assessment and Reassessment. For this section, the provider identified 2 areas as it relates to assessments and reassessments. The first one has to do with admission assessments, including risk of harm to self or others. According to the provider, this process was implemented per their policy, which resulted in a risk score of 1. There were no additional comments or actions, and it was not necessary to add this to the risk management plan. The second area pertains to annual fall risk assessments. The provider indicated that procedures are in place, but that 3 of the individuals did not have an annual fall risk assessment. They entered a risk score of 3 and indicated that more frequent monitoring by the program manager was needed and that the program manager would be responsible for completing the fall risk assessments by May 1st. It was also noted that they would add this to their risk management plan. Remember, these are just examples of risk areas related to assessment and reassessment processes. Mary Beth, let's move on to staff competence and adequacy of staffing. 520C3, Staff competency and adequacy of staffing. Don't forget, you need to address both competency and adequacy of staffing. It's not just one or the other. For this section, the provider identified 3 risk areas. The first area has to do with employee CPR first aid certification. It was determined by the provider that one employee had an expired certification. Since that employee works alone overnight, it was recommended that the employee be removed from the shift and that recertification training be completed immediately. This was assigned to the program manager and it was completed April 2nd. It was also indicated that April 12th. It was also indicated that the provider would revise their monitoring system and add this to their risk management plan. The second area pertains to DSP and supervisor competencies. It was identified that one of the DSPs had an incomplete competency in their file. The provider indicated that they would increase the frequency of employee audits and finalize the competency with the DSP. The provider also noted that this would be assigned to the program manager, who would in turn provide updates to the leadership team. The provider indicated that the risk management plan would not be updated. The third area identified relates to insufficient staffing during the evening shift. The provider found that employee burnout was resulting in high turnover. The recommendation was to increase recruitment efforts, which was assigned to the human resources for monitoring. The provider noted that this would be added to their risk management plan. These are just a few examples of risk areas related to employee competency and adequacy of staffing. Let's move on to high-risk procedures, including seclusion and restraint. 520C4, use of high-risk procedures, including seclusion and restraint. The first area has to do with the administration of high-risk medications. The provider identified that quarterly reviews of medication errors were not completed, which resulted in a risk score of 3. It was recommended that the nurse manager report medication errors to the Quality Improvement Committee quarterly. The QI committee would monitor and determine the need for any QI initiatives to address these errors. It was also noted that the provider would add this to their risk management plan. The second area identified pertains to transportation of individuals using wheelchair accessible vans. Even though there were no incidents, the provider indicated that they would conduct spot checks to ensure that safety protocols continue to be followed, which would be monitored by the program manager. Again, these are just examples. So let's move on to serious incident reviews. (520C5), review of serious incidents. For this section, the provider identified 3 risk areas. The first area has to do with serious injuries to employees, contractors, volunteers, and visitors. It was noted that a review of incidents indicated an increase in incidents involving visitors and contractors. The provider noted that further analysis was needed, and this was assigned to the risk manager. The second area pertains to the review of serious incidents. It was indicated that the provider reviewed incidents per policy and the regulatory requirement. The provider recommended that additional analysis of serious incidents was needed to determine if there are any trends or other systemic issues. Both the nurse manager and the risk manager were assigned to conduct a risk analysis and report to the risk management committee. Additionally, the provider indicated that this would be added to their risk management plan. The third area, it's not showing up. I wonder why. Can you press enter? I don't know why I did that. Thanks, Mary Beth. The third area also has to do with their review of serious incidents. It was again noted that reviews were conducted per policy, but they also noted an increase in elopements. Based on their findings, it was recommended that the program manager and risk manager review root cause analyses to ensure that the recommendations have been effective in mitigating risks related to elopements. The provider indicated that they would add efforts to mitigate risk to their risk management plan. These are just a few examples of risk areas related to the review of serious incidents. Let's move on to the final section, care concerns and additional risks. 520D, risk triggers and thresholds, also known as care concerns. If a provider has not had any care concerns, the systemic risk assessment review process would still need to outline how they would address care concerns if they were to occur. For this example, the provider indicated that there is a process in place to monitor care concerns. It was noted that care concerns involving decubitus ulcers have been addressed through a quality improvement initiative and that a performance objective was added to the quality improvement plan. The provider indicated that they would continue to monitor all care concerns. Additionally, they updated their risk management plan April 13th. As you can see, the systemic risk assessment template also includes a section for the provider to document other risk areas. Remember, systemic risk assessments vary depending on several factors, such as the organization's size, service provided, population served, location, or business model. Now let's move on to the last page of the template. This colorful chart should look familiar. Yes, it's that risk matrix that we discussed earlier, and it's located on the last page of the template to assist you in determining a risk score. As you can see, the systemic risk assessment template includes both a signature line and a line for the completion date. Don't forget, the systemic risk assessment is required to be completed at least annually. If it's not dated, then reviewers cannot verify that the systemic risk assessment was conducted at least annually. If your systemic risk assessment includes a signature line, like the template presented, then it must also be signed. So, some questions to ask yourself after completing the systemic risk assessment. Is our agency's systemic risk assessment dated? Does our systemic risk assessment incorporate a review of identified risks associated with the environment of care? Does our systemic risk assessment incorporate a review of identified risks associated with clinical assessment or reassessment processes? Does our systemic risk assessment incorporate a review of identified risks associated with staff competence and adequacy of staffing? Does our systemic risk assessment incorporate a review of identified risks associated with high-risk procedures? Does our systemic risk assessment demonstrate that individual care concern triggers were reviewed and include the actions our agency took when the threshold was met? If our agency has not had any care concerns, does our systemic risk assessment review process outline how we would address care concerns if they were to occur? Did we identify year-over-year trends and patterns and the use of baseline data to assess the effectiveness of risk management systems? Based on this information, do these risks need to be addressed in our risk management plan or as part of our quality improvement plan? Let's take a look at a non-compliant systemic risk assessment. For this systemic risk assessment, the environment of care section is missing. The risk area labeled as environmental safety suggests the completion of the mandated safety inspections as outlined in 520E. The review of serious incidents should also include a review of level 1 incident. The systemic risk assessment does not identify risks based on the provider size, population served, or unique risks associated with the provider's business model. The systemic risk assessment does not include both internal and external risk factors. This systemic risk assessment does not include any findings, recommendations, comments, or actions on how to monitor the identified risks. The systemic risk assessment does not include risk triggers and thresholds, also known as care concerns, as required per Regulation 520D. Now let's look at a compliant systemic risk assessment. The systemic risk assessment is dated. If it includes the five elements: environment of care, assessment, reassessment, staff competency, and adequacy of staffing, use of high-risk procedures, and review of serious incidents. You can go to the next slide, please. It also includes a section to address risk triggers and thresholds. The systemic risk assessment identifies specific risks associated with each of the 6 regulatory requirements and how those risks are being addressed. All components of the systemic risk assessment are clearly labeled. Don't forget, the systemic risk assessment really has 6 components: 520C 1 through 5 and 520D. Please make sure all components of your systemic risk assessment are clearly labeled. All right, let's talk about some additional tips and reminders. Determine a format. Every provider can use their own format, as every provider's risks will vary. Determine who will conduct the systemic risk assessment. Think outside the box when identifying risk areas. There is not a set number of risks for each section. Ensure the systemic risk assessment is conducted at least annually, which is verified by including the date the provider conducted their annual risk assessment, informs the risk management plan, and incorporates uniform risk triggers and thresholds. Remember, the annual systemic risk assessment must be dated so that reviewers can verify that it was conducted at least annually. Final tips and reminders. A systemic risk assessment is required for all service types, and all required areas must be reviewed. As noted in the guidance for risk management, the annual systemic risk assessment is a necessary component of a provider's risk management plan. Upon completion of the systemic risk assessment, the provider should consider next steps. Assign recommendations to appropriate staff members, departments, and committees. Determine what recommendations to include in the risk management plan. Determine how to monitor risk reduction strategies for effectiveness, and continue to conduct systemic risk assessment reviews as needed. And now back to Mary Beth.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Lots of great tips there and lots of great information. Oh my gosh, I feel like we've covered so much, and I really hope our participants have gotten a lot out of this. We are at the point of today's training where we are going to talk about homework. So we've covered all of the content that we had planned for today. And as Britt discussed at the beginning, we have homework for you. So don't worry, it will not be graded. The focus of today's presentation has been the systemic risk assessment. Your homework is to take at least one step to begin your systemic risk assessment right now. If you've already begun it, you can take this opportunity to update it or add it, or make sure it has that date and signature on it. Some ideas for taking this next step would be, gosh, use the new systemic risk assessment template that Mackenzie introduced to you, new from the Office of Licensing. How great is that? This template was sent to you prior to today's training, so you should have it in your mailbox along with the other tools. Also, you can start identifying your risk areas within each of the 6 categories. You could think about convening your team to begin or update your assessment. And of course, if you have one already, think about, does it include all 6 components? And I'm repeating myself, does it have a date on it? We would love for you to be prepared to share what you did at the next session, which is just 1 week away. It is next Friday. So between now and then, do one thing, at least one thing, hopefully more, to get that systemic risk assessment in good order. Okay. It looks like we are ending sooner than we thought today, guys, but don't leave yet. This brings us almost to the end of today's session. Of course, we want to thank you for attending, and we hope to see you at next Friday's session. We will build on the concepts introduced today and also introduce a new exciting tool to help you track risks and conditions. I don't think you want to miss that. As a reminder, of frequently asked questions along with the slides and handouts will be available after the training. The handouts were sent to you before the training. Last but not least, we have a post test. Please take the time to do the post test. If you want to type it, I don't think you can click on it, but if you want to type it, the link is on the screen, but it has been emailed to you or will be emailed to you. It will come from Tanya, I believe. So if you don't have it in your email box yet, you will very soon. And so with the time, we scheduled this until noon. So technically you have 30 minutes to complete that survey whenever you get it in your email box. We'd love for you to take the time to do it now while the training is fresh in your mind. However, we are keeping it open until next Tuesday, April 18th at noon. But I really encourage you to not wait. Just go ahead and do it. It's really important for us to hear from you. We need to know what you got out of this training. It helps us know how we can improve it for the future. So with that, the next 3 slides, I will scroll through them, and they have resources. So when you receive these slides as handouts, you'll also receive this great list of resources that have the hyperlinks. You can click on them. Has all the great resources from the Office of Licensing that Mackenzie and Larissa reviewed for us. And it also has some resources from our office and the Office of Clinical Quality Management and Community Quality Improvement. Oops. And also those are the hot links there. So with that, I guess we are done for today. I don't know, guys, if we want to hang on and still answer questions for a bit, we can do that. And make sure people get that email with the survey link.
Mary Beth, I think we are going to take a look at the questions and incorporate them into the FAQ.
Into an FAQ. Okay, so no more live answers today. Is that right?
Team, can you confirm?
That is correct. We are ensuring we're capturing all of the questions in the Q&A, and we will formalize the FAQ documents with the responses.
Thank you, Tanya.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Tanya. All right. Well, I guess with that, I guess we can go ahead and close the webinar. And
Mary Beth, we did have one hand raised. I don't know exactly when that hand went up.
okay.
It was at the
We
beginning.
have 2 hands raised. We have a bunch of hands raised.
Oh,
Yeah.
If y'all want to put your question or whatever in the question and answer, that might be the easiest thing for us to do.
Yes, thank you.
yeah. Thanks, Brett. So yes, there are a number of hands raised. So for those of you with hands raised, it's probably best to type those questions in the Q&A. And the purpose of that, I think, is to give us time to be thoughtful with our responses and make sure that everybody gets the responses and can see them. So, and I know we'll make sure those are timely.
Mary Beth, I'm saying one person did not receive the post-training questions.
The post-training questions. Oh, the survey.
Guess that'd be the post-test.
Okay. Okay, it looks like Tanya is saying she has to wait until the training ends in order to send out the survey. So actually, probably nobody's gotten it yet.
Okay.
So she needs a report of attendees first. So that just gives us further reason to go ahead and close this so we can wrap it and get that survey out to people.
And who's ever the host, we'll just want to hang on to make sure all the questions have been copied over prior to us closing, or else those questions will be lost. So for internal members, please stay on until we make sure we've copied all of those.
Okay, great.
And there's some requests to paste the link maybe into the, please paste the link here to test. I guess they're wanting it in the question and answer.
I'm not sure that people can copy the link from the Q&A, but we can definitely try to do that.
I'm going to try to do that right now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can maneuver around. It looks like I can maybe send something to everybody. So let me try that. That would be great. Bear with us, everybody. Okay. Make sure it's the right one. Yep. And chat. Okay. Okay, I'm going to try it out. I put it in. It says to everyone, but I'm not sure what that means.
And yes, the training was recorded. That's come up a few times from a few different times.
Oh, yes, it is recorded. Oh, it works. Oh, great. Oh, I'm so happy. Great. So the link, everybody should be able to see the link in the chat. to the post survey. Oh, awesome. I'm so happy that worked. So we can leave that there for people to respond to it, to click on it. Oh yeah, thanks everybody for letting me know that you got it.
And again, registering for the next session 2. Again, it's in the notice that went out from the Office of Licensing on March 22. And click on the date for the second session, and that will allow you to register when you click on that date.
Right. I can probably also put that link in the chat as well. The link to register.
Also answered that earlier. So if they go back to the question and answer pod and go scroll back up to the top, that information was also put in there earlier. Someone asked that question when the training first started.
Okay, so I just put that in the chat to everyone as well, the link to register for day 2. That should work for everybody. All right, so Tanya, I'm going to look to you to see if when you've captured all the questions, and you can close when you think we can close. That makes sense.
And yes, if a person was not able to attend today, they can attend for the next session, but they're going to need to be brought up to speed from the session today, so they don't come in just totally cold on session 2, because each session builds off of the previous session.
Okay,